Today's guest is Vincent Mercandetti, a watch dealer out of Central Florida. And I'll keep it real, when I first saw his numbers, I had to go back and check them twice.
Made about $500,000 in basically the first 15 months.
But here's the part that got me. He's doing this all while selling watches between the $1,000 to $8,000 range. No Rolex flipping, no Richard Mills, just a guy to Central Florida with a full-time job and 2 kids at home, crushing the watch game.
But like I said, I still work full-time, so it's not a full-time thing, but it is something I love and take seriously.
We start with this story because Vincent didn't come up like most dealers. He was actually an enthusiast first. In fact, he bought and sold about 100 watches before he even tried to make a profit on his first one. And his first sale as a dealer, a Publix parking lot sale.
First watch I ever sold was in a Publix parking lot, which is very Florida. That was the first time it hit me like, this is a game to a degree. Like, I'm part of something that I'm not aware of.
Then we dive into his blueprint, where he actually sources whether you can or can't build a successful business like his without a dealer network. And finally, his system, what his day actually looks like and how you fit a $500,000 business in the cracks of a full life. So if you're somebody who's been waiting on the sidelines, waiting for the perfect time to buy, this is the perfect episode for you. Grab that cup of coffee and enjoy the show.
My advice would be to just win, acclimate yourself into the community and don't quit, and just put in the work.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to The Second Hand, the podcast for the ones who never stop moving. My name is Andres Tagliaferro. I'm the host of the show, founder of WristBook, an all-in-one solution for watch dealers. And the purpose of this podcast, before we dive into this very special story, is to do just that, to share the stories of other watch dealers who are crushing it in the game for 2 purposes. One, for entertainment purposes. I think watch dealers have some of the coolest stories and it's a really fun business to talk about. But 2, for people who have considered buying and selling watches to have a place to come and learn from the people doing it on the field. A long form place where people sit down with me and give you all of the sauce to succeed. So if you're a watch dealer yourself, I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button or follow us on whatever listening platform you're listening on. And I encourage you to connect with whoever's on this podcast right now, because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. So without further ado, let's get into the show. Vincent Mercandetti, and I'm excited to talk to him and just share his story, because I think, to see personally, as somebody who migrated his information over into software, to see somebody who's grown so much in such little time, I think he has a lot of value to share in terms of how can you scale? Can you actually make a living off of buying and selling watches, and get to really know Vincent's blueprint as to how to build a legitimate business with watch reselling. So Vincent, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Always excited to talk about myself. So this is exciting.
Let's go. Awesome, brother. So I like to just get right into it. I think the way these episodes are structured is we're going to cover kind of your personal story. Then we're going to go into the blueprint around how you've managed to build what you are currently building. And then finally, the system you use to make it all happen. So first and foremost, how did you get your first watch? And when did you realize that, this could actually be a business?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a loaded question for my circumstance, because I don't think I started like most watch dealers. I actually started because I'm a massive watch enthusiast. So my first watch was my first automatic watch. I've worn, fossils since I was a kid. And it wasn't until around, we'll say 2023, that I was lying in bed one night and saw a Facebook ad for a mechanical watch. And I was also at a time in my life, with a less than 1-year-old, where I kind of was looking for a hobby and something that I can learn more about and not leave my house because I didn't have time to. So this ad pops up. I'm like, oh, I like watches. Like, that's neat. Started researching it, and it was a lightning bolt in my life. I mean, it just immediately, like the fascination took off. It took my wife by surprise, because like all of a sudden overnight I just started talking about watches constantly. She's like, where did this come from? So my first mechanical watch ever, or automatic watch, was a Squall A20 1545. It was like sunray blue, basically a Submariner homage, and I wore that to a trip I took to Alaska.
Wow.
And yeah, was like super pumped about it. So that was my first automatic watch that kind of kickstarted everything that would follow. My first watch for profiting, from a business standpoint, was a Bill and Ross diver, bronze editions, like a green, very unique green with, made out of bronze.
Nice.
And yeah, that was the first one that I intentionally bought it with the purpose of flipping it. We'll say it that way.
Wow, that's really cool. Just out of curiosity, what made you kind of, I know the first buy and buying the first watch, with the intention of selling it is, something that brings a little bit of nervousness to anybody trying to get into the trade. So what made you go with that model? And can you kind of just, if you can, just briefly describe for anybody watching, like how important is the first watch when you're trying to build kind of a business out of this?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept because to this day, that's the only Bell and Ross I've ever bought.
Wow,
So,
interesting.
and I did it solely because when you're first starting out, and again, I think I was probably a little different because I probably had bought about 100 watches at that point.
Wow.
Uh, for myself, and just
Yeah.
so I knew how to sell watches. I didn't know how to sell them for profit. So it was basically like, oh, I have this Tudor Pelagos. 6 months later, let me try
Mm,
something. So I'm selling it at a loss, like a slight loss, over and over
yeah.
and over again.
Wow.
Uh, and that actually is what inspired me to get into the business in the first place. It was like, for my own purposes, like my own watch collecting, I need
Mm.
to not lose money anymore. So
Wow. Yeah. That makes
that
sense.
yeah, that was my motivation. But when it came to this watch, it was really just a numbers game. Once I learned sort of, how the bacon gets cooked,
Mm.
uh, this one came up, and it was, I took the seller. I do everything that people tell you should not do. So I'm a terrible example. If anyone's out there like wanting to get into it, I'm a terrible example for what you shouldn't do. But I took this person off platform, from eBay, and nice guy, we're talking. I think one of the things that is my advantage is I am a watch enthusiast, so I'll talk to you as long as you want about
Right.
watches, your collection, my collection, all that.
Mm.
So we had a bond there, and really I only targeted it because I basically at the time, like, had a list of models that I would just cross-reference and do
Nice.
my little formula or whatever it is, and figure out, okay, where is the market inefficiency. This Bell and Ross
Mm.
popped up, and I thought it was a good deal. And then offline, I was able to lower the price. Obviously, there's no fees, and it worked out. And then it gets into the whole trust thing and making sure I'm
Yeah.
not going to get scammed and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it worked out. So it's really just a numbers game. I had no one tipped me off about this watch. I didn't know anything about it. I never
Mm.
fell in Ross. It just seemed like something that I should target, and it worked out.
That makes sense. I mean, I think what you're describing, going from enthusiast to seller, which is cool because you're still an enthusiast, you don't just change. But this kind of roadmap to building a business out of something you love is so natural in every other line of business. And so what I'm hearing is there's this guy, if I had the choice, if I'm a consumer and I know 10 watch dealers and I know one guy had 100 watches before he even sold one of them, I'm probably going to lean towards the guy who actually knows about the trade more than the others. And so that leads me kind of into my next question when thinking about just making that pivot, deciding, what, instead of selling these at a loss, because, I'm done collecting this one, I want to get rid of it. When did you, like, when you made that decision, what or who taught you this game early on? Did you have somebody in your life, or did you have some sort of program you watched or anything that helped you kind of understand the game of watch flipping and building that business?
So the first watch I ever sold was in a Publix parking lot, which is very Florida, uh, to a dealer named Nick Holt. And I didn't know he was I didn't know what a dealer was when it was a Ball Fireman was the watch that I sold him at a loss. But he happened to live about 30 minutes from me, and we negotiated on the price and whatnot. He's like, I'll meet you in person. I had no
Mm,
I had no vouches or anything. So that was another thing that you have to keep in mind when you're getting into
mm,
watch selling, is you need people to be able to vouch for you. Um, in order to gain a reputation. So I was like, this is perfect. Like, he's local, nice guy. I can sell my watch, I can make the money I want to make, probably to buy another watch. So I meet him
yeah.
in the parking lot, and we talk. we're shooting the shit essentially, right? We're in person. So I sell him the watch. Everything looks good, and I picked his ring like a little bit, like, oh, so like, do you do this as like, is this a job, like, blah blah blah. So he told me a very little bit, like a couple of brands that were popular at his price points, because that's always different too, right? It's a different
Mm,
conversation. I'm talking to someone who's selling VC and Rolex to someone who might be selling Spinnaker and to,
interesting.
like a micro brand. So he's telling me from his perspective what that, like, hey, yeah, I can buy this and I can sell it and I'll make, whatever, $100, $200. And that was the first time it hit me like, this is a game to a degree. Like, I'm
Yeah.
part of something that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
Um, Over time, as I started, buying from other dealers and whatnot, like, then the questions start to come, which is, how are these people making money? Like, I'm
Mhm.
buying it for less than I would buy it in a store, and I'm buying it for less than I would buy at that point. I'm buying it for less than I would buy on a website or from eBay or from Chrono, because now at this point I'm starting to make, I'm starting to have dealers that I've bought from before. But then I'm like, how are they selling at this price? Like, what are they buying at, and how do they do that? And that was really
Mm.
the first kernel where I was like, okay, this can be a business. I need to
Yeah.
figure out how that works. So he was my first influence where I found out like this existed. And then I'd say
Mm.
over time, especially with how I was trained, like I joined a very popular, community for watch trading.
Nice.
And had a support system, including that first Bell and Ross watch. What I did with it was I bought it and then I brokered it to a different dealer and then he sold it. So I
Nice.
made a profit, he made his profit. And he was someone who was really, I still talk to both those guys every day, or not every
Yeah.
day, but I talk both of those guys, and he was very influential in terms of, sort of explaining that next layer. And now, like, I'm in a bunch of dealer chats, like I really have an intimate view to it. But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of them. I love living in Central Florida because I think it's a very tight knit community.
Right.
Um, for watch sellers, it's for whatever reason like a hot area to sell
Yeah.
watches. So yeah, just a bunch of those guys. I've met most of them in person since they live local. So yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a village for sure.
Nice, man. Yeah. I think that is one of the things I've noticed coming into the game, as a software developer trying to impact it, is how tight knit those communities are. There's Central Florida. There's even, I've noticed, Scottsdale is a pretty big
Yeah,
hub over there in Arizona.
yeah,
Obviously, you have like the big markets, right? Like Miami, New York, London. But it is cool to find those pockets of like, oh, wow, there's actually a huge community in this, like, Midwest town of the United States. And I do think it's one of the most, which is, and maybe you can speak to this more than I can, but I think there is kind of a stigma of watch and jewelry. There is this stigma that it's like a dirty game, that it's like, survival of the fittest and everybody's kind of in it for themselves. How true is that? At least in your experience, I'm sure, of course, I'm not making no broad stroke generalizations. I'm sure there's people
yeah.
who do bad business, but in
Everyone
your
is,
experience,
yeah.
yeah, is that true or is that a myth?
No, I think it's actually the complete opposite. It's not to say that doesn't exist, right? That reputation comes from somewhere. You're watching 47th Street YouTube videos and
Yeah.
finding out guys are selling, Rolexes without original parts and stuff like that does exist. And I would never tell someone like trust any watch dealer, like they'll take care of you. Like, you definitely want
Yeah.
to buy. This is a very common line in watch trading. You want to, buy the seller. Um,
Mm,
and so that stuff exists for sure, but in the your typical person who's online in a Facebook group selling a watch, and they're easily verified and they can get 3, 5, 10 vouches, whatever, from people who have done business with them before, they're going to take care of you 99% of the time.
yeah.
I can count on one hand how many experiences I've had where I was, someone sold me something that maybe I didn't think was the way that they told me it was going to be sold, or timeline, whatever.
Yeah.
um, so I think it's quite the opposite, because a reputation is so huge. Like,
Right.
industry at my level, I'm probably sitting in that like one to, we'll say, $8,000 range. Like, right, those are
Mm,
the my watches cost that I'm buying and selling. But there's people who are in the 150,000 plus range, so
Right, right.
you are taking thousands of dollars from someone, and they're trusting you that not only are you going to give them what you're telling them you're going to give them, but it's going to be in the condition that you say it's going to be and include the things that you're saying it's going to include, and get to them, in whatever time frame it is. And that's a huge trust. Like that's an
Yeah.
enormous trust to have. So I kind of keep that in the back of my mind whenever I'm working with someone, is like this, like I have one shot here to get
Mm,
this right.
yeah.
If I sell them, so, and I've had, a couple of times where it hasn't worked out the way I wanted it to. And
Yeah.
then it's a matter of what are you going to do to correct it. But
Mm,
yeah, I mean that's how I look at it. So when I've had my experiences, like if you're buying the seller correctly, reputation's everything. You can
mm.
one bad mistake and you could be done. So
That's good.
no, yeah, I'd say reputation's a huge thing, and if you're in the right communities and talking to the right people, you're going to get taken care of almost,
Yeah.
probably every time.
That's really cool. I think that's one of the things that the social media influencers in the space, up there in the 47th Street, the people who have helped kind of push the game into mainstream. I think that's something they've really highlighted. I've seen so many like expose videos or so many little, clips of people being called out for doing bad business. And, I think, say what you want about that. It does what you're saying it does, which is it means that the people who are in the game usually are very reputable and very, trustworthy.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that that's a big point, is like, and it's not to say everyone on 47th Street's a crook, because that's not true either.
right.
But it is to say that sometimes I think we lose sight of what it's like to not be from this perspective. Sometimes
Mm,
it's easy to just be working dealer to dealer, forget what it's like to be a retail client where they don't know any of this. So like,
right, right.
so what is sexy, what sells, it's going to be the controversy, and
Mm,
but that's what some retail people are going to be. And there's people who swear by ADs. They're never going to buy used
yeah.
because they don't trust it. And I can understand that perspective. But for everyone in between, like, yeah, there's that aspect of it. You kind of have to earn their trust. And I get it. And I think that works, probably in any industry, but definitely this one.
Nice. Man, that's so insightful. I love that. I love that we got to cover that. I think that the last kind of question I had in regards to your story and where you're at is, could you kind of dive in a little bit into kind of when you started buying and selling watches? Give us kind of a timeline of when you started, where you're at today, how long you've been doing it. And if you could just give us like a rough like ballpark number of how much you've seen in revenue, so people can really have like a ballpark understanding of who you are and how you've kind of built your business as we continue into the blueprint in the system.
Sure. So timeline wise, I think in 2021, I decided I wanted more than one watch. So I bought a couple at the time. Of Bulova Marine Star Quartz watch was my sale end all. It's like $450. That was going to be the centerpiece of my collection. Um, Around the holiday season 2023 was when I had that epiphany of the Facebook ad and the mechanical watch.
Nice.
Started collecting those. Set aside $1,000. I wanted two watches, and one was the Squall, the other one was a Mito Multifort. That was spring of 2024. I sat in a room in my house with a screen open for 3 days trying to buy a Sin 556 because it was my first
Hmm.
watch that had over $1,000, and I was panicking and did not know I wanted to buy that
Wow.
to that money on the watch. That was
Yeah.
in early summer 2024, and then I sold that and a bunch of household stuff for a Black Bay, a Tudor Black Bay
Oh,
58
nice.
in July of 2024, and that was the start of luxury watch
Mm.
buying. And by August of 2025, I started the business. So
Nice.
we're basically at a year now, like a year and
Ah,
2 months, we'll say. Yeah,
happy early anniversary.
thank you.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, so that was kind of the escalation of it. So from
That's cool.
early 2024 until late summer 2025, I was just a watch enthusiast who probably bought and sold about 100 watches.
Wow.
And from August of 2025 until now, I've probably sold around 200 more watches and sold about $450,000 in revenue. So
Wow.
I think the way I'm pacing, big stats nerd, I think by the end of October I'll have made like $500,000 in revenue in
Let's
selling,
go.
not
Dude.
profit. You're wrong. I'm not that good.
Of course, of course. No, but that's still, that's great.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
so it'll be about $500,000 in basically the first 15 months for revenue.
That's beautiful, man. Congrats, man. That's awesome. To do that, what, it's going to be 2-3 months after your 1 year anniversary. I feel like that's crazy. And I've seen so many crazy stories of people really scaling fast because, like you said, it's a game of making the right buy and buying correctly. And it allows you to sell at a better profit margin. And you do that enough times, you end up making $500,000 a year. And so,
and that's very, very arbitrary too, right? Because there's some people who are coming in with $50,000 to $100,000 that they're going to use buying watches. They can hit that in the first 2 or 3 months. And there's other people who are buying, $500 watches, and it might take them, years to do that. So I don't know that number is impressive necessarily, but I do think it's sort of a pride thing, just in the sense that enough people have trusted me that I could sell $500,000 of watches. Doesn't really affect, then you have to start looking at, okay, what's ROI and profit margins and stuff, and that kind of dictates where you stand in that hierarchy. But from simply a number standpoint, yeah, it's exciting to me that I've had that many watches to buy and sell. There's also the enthusiast part. Like, I've had so many watches come into my possession. Some of them I've worn until I've sold them and whatnot. And that's exciting too. It's just exciting. I've had 300 watches in 2.5 years.
That's so cool. And you say, I think it's important to point out too, you say it's not the most impressive because somebody coming in with a higher budget, and I agree, but the fact that you're a 1 to 8K watch seller and you've made, it's a lot, it's a lot of work. You put the work in. So, before we keep going, actually, I do have a quick question about that. Now that you have, you've revenued $500,000, right? And you know what it's like to flip those 1 to 8K. What suggestion, obviously, when people join and start buying and selling watches, they're going to opt in for the lower, echelon of, priced watches. But what's keeping you from going into the higher priced watches at this point, if anything? Or is that something you're excited to do?
No, it's entirely self-inflicted wounds. Like I said, I started to get into this for my own watch collection. This is something that is very behind the scenes, and I don't think necessarily is a law, but I love watches, and my collection is now down to like 4 or 5 that I want for myself. These are just my favorite watches that I want to own. So some of my money has gone towards funding that. Like I said, I'm not a pure numbers seller, it's like, hey, it's an asset to me. I never touched a watch before I started selling them. I'm not like that. Like, to me, obviously the high majority of the watches I'm buying with the intention to sell, but I'm using that towards a motivation to, my Rolex Zombie, for example, that has now been paid for entirely because of these other watches that I've sold. So I bring that up because my capital is not where it would be had I not had that part of things going on. But for the most part, I have scaled into like the 8-ish, we'll call it, thousand, and I don't like that market. I don't find that it's substantially more lucrative than we'll say $4,000 to $6,000 market, and then it becomes an ROI situation to me. Like, this is a great example. This is a very recent and very great example that is kind of a good reminder for me. I bought a watch for $1,500 and sold it for cash and 2 watches in a trade. Those 2 watches both cost under $600. And profited just about $350. So $1,500 investment that profited in the end $350. I look at that ROI, which is pretty good. That's what, like 20%, over 20%. I can go buy a $4,000 reverse Panda Tudor chronograph, and I know for a fact, anytime I do it, I'm going to profit $300 to $500. I just, to the penny, I've had that watch 7 times. 7 or 8 times I know to the penny what I need to buy that watch at. And I don't mind going like, this is another thing too. Some dealers are like 20% or I'm not interested. I'm not like that. If I'm going to profit, I don't mind spending the money, but I do look at it as it might cost me, whatever, we'll say $3,000 to buy a watch and I might make $400. Well, what was the better deal? Was it $1,500 to make 300 or 3,000 to make 400? Obviously, it's the one where you're spending less money. So I like that, I like kind of the higher margin, lower number investments. Then I also, and that goes up to that 4,000 to 6,000 mark. I think once my capital gets to a point where I can go and start spending on a $15,000 watch, then it'll be a blend for sure.
Nice.
But it's a simple math. I mean, if I want 3 of those, that's $45,000. And then I also want to keep, I love the client. The other thing too, as a watch enthusiast, I love the clientele that is below $4,000. Like the micro brand clientele and the that is the salt of the earth watch enthusiast to me. Love working with them. I never want to lose that. So to me, it would be a blend, but I need to get to a point where I can buy 3 watches for $45,000 and then also money for this. And then there's also like things like brokering and overhead expenses and stuff like that. So I'm not at that in terms of revolving capital, which is so if I'm not going to be at that, rather than buy like one watch for 15,000 and try and scale up, I'm going to buy a series of smaller watches and keep building that capital.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. It's funny because from my background, I come from a marketing background and I've done a lot of selling, coaching offers, a bunch of these things that in the creative space. So I used to teach content marketing to a lot of, a lot of clients. And one of the things when I was trying to develop my offer, it was that question of, that reality of low ticket in business in general and high ticket are always going to be great markets. But the middle ground is where you lose everybody, because that's where people start saying, oh, it's not worth this because of this and that. And so that makes so much sense to me as somebody, again, completely outside of the watch dealer world, that, yeah, of course, if you can make a better margin more times, that makes way more sense than making a smaller margin one time for a bigger number if it's going to equal the same amount over 10.
And that answer will be totally different depending on anyone you talk to. Like some people kill it in the $8,000 to $12,000 market.
Interesting, yeah.
Some people scale up in a linear way. Some people just skip it entirely and start at $15,000.
Yeah.
So it's it's very anecdotal. For me, I have found, like sub 8,000 is one clientele that, there's money to be made there. And then I'm kind of going to wait until I can skip a couple of tiers. And then I'd go to like that 12 or 15,000 plus, and kind of break into that. And then, you have to keep in mind like your clients and stuff too. If I started at micro brands and things that were under $1,000, well, a lot of my clients are not looking for a $15,000 watch right now.
Right.
I gotta my way to that. And the way to do that, like I have one client who would be in, or, more than one, but let's say there's one I'm thinking of who would be in that range. Well, he's selling me his Tudors. He's selling me those $4,000 to $6,000 watches because he's going to go buy a Rolex. I can't fund the Rolex for inventory. I can obviously broker anything for anyone.
Right.
So that's kind of how I think about it too, is I will eventually have those clients because they're selling me less expensive watches, but I can't start with, hey, I'm going to go invest like $50,000 tomorrow on a few of these watches and expect that I have this clientele that can kind of support that. I have to work my way to that. So
that makes total sense.
It could be different for someone else. They might have that. So I look at that.
Well, if you know anybody who's in that mid-market and want to send them this episode so we can interview them, that'd be great, because I do think that'd be interesting to see how people do scale in that mid-market because of the nightmare that, middle markets are. Real quick, this podcast is brought to you by WristBook, the only true all-in-one watch dealer specific operations platform. Here's the elevator pitch: your buyers, your inventory, and your books all in one place. That's right, a full scope CRM, cutting edge inventory management tech, and finally full depth accounting with like report building, like so many things that that just don't exist in the current ecosystem of software for watch dealers. My goal when I chose to build WristBook was to build something that actually made watch dealers' lives easier, not something to add to all of the stress that comes with running a watch dealership. So instead of just trying to compete with other inventory management softwares or create a watch specific accounting tool, we decided to just make one big thing that allows watch dealers to just sign up for one thing and be able to not have anything else. If you watch all the way to the end, we actually talked to today's guest about why they use WristBook and how it's helped improve their workflow. You don't have to hear it from me, you can hear it from our guest today. But if you are a watch dealer and you are trying to take your dealership seriously and turn this hobby into a business, or maybe you're already a successful watch dealer but just want a better solution for your business operations, visit get.wristbook.io to sign up today. At the point of recording this podcast, we are still filling up our founding cohort, which means we're offering all of that good stuff I just mentioned for just 79 bucks a month for life for anybody who signs up today. Okay, that's done. Now back to the good stuff. So as we kind of segue, we kind of already jumped into the blueprint, which I love, but between segments, I like doing this segments called the Grail. Okay, so this is, I want to ask you this very personal question, nothing to do with business, but I think it's going to be especially interesting coming from a watch enthusiast like yourself. So what is the one watch that you own or that maybe you would buy? You can kind of just disclose whether it's one you would buy or one you currently own that you would just never sell. What's your Grail watch?
That's a very tough question for me because I'm a watch enthusiast. You know, when I started, I was like, I bought this whole thing that holds 17 watches. I was like, I'm gonna eventually have this. Maybe I'll have to buy a second one day. Like I just in my head when I started, I was like, I'll collect watches over time until I have infinite amounts. Very quickly noticed I'm way too neurotic for that. And that number went from like 17 down to 11, 11 down to 9, 9 down to 7. Now I realize if I'm not wearing a watch for a period of time, I have to sell it. Like it's not a matter of it's a weird, and this is a type of enthusiast for sure. Like I'm not the only one who's like this, but there are other ones who do just collect it. They consider their watches their children. They'll never sell any of them. I'm prefacing this answer by saying never say never.
Right.
Because right now the answer is my Rolex Zombie GMT. It's the two-tone.
Love that watch.
So that I just got last month, right around
Nice.
4th of July. I didn't expect it yet. It was kind of a surprise for my AD. I was like,
that's awesome.
Come in like a year. She called me and was like, hey, this is ready right now. And I was like, all right, now I have to find $21,700 to pay for this. Selling some watches I wasn't expecting to sell. But yeah, so that right now, I mean, that was like my dream watch when I first started looking into Rolex. I was like, that's a beautiful watch. It's two-tone, so I have a gold or silver necklace, so like it ties in everything else that I wear.
Wow.
Black dial, it goes with anything. I can dress it up or down, and it has a GMT feature and a two-tone bezel. So to me, I'm like, this is the most practical $20,000 watch I can think of.
That's a great point.
Yeah, but I'll also say, like, if I get to a point in my life where I have VC and Patek and maybe this is my least expensive watch, like but I have no idea. But right now it's the love of my life, centerpiece. You know, I can never imagine selling it because I worked to get to this point. And I think that's the point of Grail watches. And that's also why people have different Grail watches as their life goes on. Because once you obtain one, that's like, where are you now and what do you hope to get to? So that is the watch I have that I never intend to sell. A VC Overseas.
I love that one too.
Yeah, I think they're like $28,000, so it's not off, but that's like my trim. Blue is my favorite color. So that's like, I think that's the most beautiful blue watch that's ever existed. So that's something I would go for too. And then you start getting into like a Calatrava, however you say that. By the way, I can't pronounce any of the names of watches.
That makes two of us.
I don't even know if it's Patek or Patek, but the Calatrava, it's like black and red, black with red accents. That
was beautiful.
That one I would love to have. So yeah, that's it. I do find over about $50,000, except for the Nautilus turquoise one, which I don't know how much that is. It's a lot. And some of the like Rolex chronographs that are not your normal Daytona, black or white dial. outside of those, I don't have many watches over $50,000 that I think are attractive. Just a
Yeah.
weird. Yeah, maybe I haven't
Well,
seen enough of them, but I like that. To me is like my dream watch is somewhere under $50,000. It's not
mm,
like, oh, this costs $400,000, therefore it's my Grail.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you would have said Richard Mille and then have been a self-professed watch enthusiast, I think we all would
That's
have
a
been
great
like,
example. Yeah. No, I'll tell you, I have a Frank Miller right now.
oh, I love Frank Miller. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
which I consider like the more affordable Richard Mille because they're kind of the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
I know Richard Mille, what they're doing from a technology standpoint, obviously is much different. And the watch costs a lot different, but I can safely say I think Frank Miller's are very, very cool, but it's not my style. Same with Cartier
Mm,
Santos. Like I think that's an
yeah.
awesome watch. I can't pull it off. So
Mm,
Richard Mille is kind of out for that. Say, yeah, people feel that and Hublot are like the most polarizing brands I think that you can. But say what you want about them. I don't hate them as a brand for any particular reason. I just could
right.
not pull them off.
Yeah, I feel that way about Breitlings. I don't know why. I just haven't been able to find one that like
That's
looks good on
another
my
one.
wrist. Yeah.
Top Time. I love Top Times. They're also a chronograph.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't really do leather well, and I don't do chronographs well. So
Mm, yeah.
and I've had, I don't know, like 5 to 10 Breitlings. I'm with you though. At that price point, it's probably ranking very low in terms of
Mm.
the brand that I buy from.
Moving into the blueprint, I think we already kind of talked a little bit about kind of where you source, which was one of my questions I had here. You are clearly, kind of you have a community of dealers that you source your watches from. Is that true? Or would you like to kind of expound on, where you personally source your watches the most and maybe give some advice for any up and coming dealers on how to do
I
that?
Yeah, so obviously at dealer networks. I mean, if you're serious about getting into dealing, you have to be in that community. And there's several communities, it's not just like one source.
Right.
Dealer networks super helpful to buy and sell. I would say you can get some really great deals. You're never going to make your biggest profit margins are going to come obviously with a normal person who is outside of that community. For that, I
Right.
look on eBay and Chrono are my two biggest ones. Reddit's hard for me because it's like too many options and I don't have a good way of filtering them unless like if I was targeting a specific model of a watch, I could look there. I
Mm,
have bought from there before, but I've mainly bought from people who have kind of made connections with who I met there, and now they're
nice.
kind of offering, whatever they've got going on. But I
Yeah.
don't actively source on Reddit. There's some aggregate group or aggregate, sites or tools that you can use that will look for all of these things. But for the most part, Chrono and Reddit's like my bread and butter, and then dealer chats as well every so often.
Awesome. I love it. That makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that, in fact, this is kind of more of a question for you, to the dealer that might think they can pull off that big company that they're dreaming of without that network of dealers to work with. You think that's possible? Or do you think, no, like finding a good community of dealers is almost pivotal?
Yeah, that is a good question. Because I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure like
Right,
some.
right, right.
Um, I think it would be really hard without a community of dealers, only because you run into so many situations where you are looking for a specific watch.
Mm,
And obviously, if you're only finding that on retail websites, like the client can find that too. So see, you're not giving
right.
sort of deal. So I can't imagine it's easy to do it without a community network. I think you can do it without formal training.
Mm,
Um, and I think you can do it like with mentorship. We kind of talked about earlier, like there are dealers who are willing to kind of take you under their wing and teach you the business, and you don't have to pay for formal training to do it.
yeah.
Um, but one of the great things about formal training and one of the great things in general is that community and having that network, because you do have just a wider access to things. You can decide how far you want to go into it. Because there's chats I'm not a part of, or maybe
Right.
pay to be into them. And like this is another thing too, is you have to kind of know where you are in the business. I
Mm,
don't need to be in chats that are selling Rolexes all day long.
right.
Not because I don't love Rolex, I obviously do, but I am not at a price point where that's what I'm stocking. So to be in a chat that's like 10,000 and up, like that's not me yet. So I'm not going to
Yeah.
go in
Yeah.
that direction. But like a sub 8K or, whatever the case may be. Like, yeah, like
Mm,
that's a great resource to have. So can you do it without that stuff? Probably. Anytime there's a market, people do it in retail all the time with other things. Anytime
right.
you have the ability to know market value and find market inefficiency, you can do this job. It's just a matter of what resources you want at your disposal and how much you're willing to invest in it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. It's what's that quote? If you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think
Yeah.
this applies there as well. But man, I think one of the biggest questions I had in this segment, in the blueprint, is really, I want to talk about margin a little bit, because like you said, you're a 1 to 8K dealer. And so I think we touched on this a little bit, but if you could just kind of give us your blanket statement advice for the new dealer who's thinking about margin, and maybe they're gung-ho about, I need to get the watch that gives me 200% margin, I need to find the freaking gold, the diamond in the cave. What would you tell that person about the reality about margin, and how would you speak to the audience about thinking about that?
And it's a great question because I see that the most, I think, out of new dealers. And again, I wouldn't consider myself new only because I was selling watches before. So
Right.
I had a little bit of market value knowledge. But there's people I see every day who come into this business and they have never sold a watch and they're looking to buy their one. And that is analysis by paralysis a lot. Where they're so scared to lose. My advice would be to just win. And what I mean by that is, don't get so caught up in a number, and I did this. To give you the first month I did this for profit, I made about $2,000, which I thought, holy shit, my life just changed overnight. If I'm starting at 2,000 a month, like, imagine where I'll be a year from now. Well, a year from now, it's more about getting that consistently than it is like I
That's
imagine.
real.
I haven't had $20,000 month yet.
Mm.
But month two, I made like $350. And the difference was, and this is, in my personal life, I work in talent acquisition, so I see this in real life too. You start in a job, right? In year one, you want to master that job, and you are doing everything you can to understand it and learn it. And then in year two, you overcompensate. And you start, and then year three is when they say you've mastered you've mastered that job you're in. And if you talk to CEO coaches and whatnot, they'll tell you stay in the job for 2 to 3 years and then try and get that upward mobility. It's kind of similar idea with watch trading, in that month one, I did everything by the book and it was fruitful for me. Month two, I was like, all right, this job's really easy. Let me go cut corners here, and there.
Yeah.
Basically nothing. I was selling watches where I could have made a lot more money, and I was buying watches at higher than I would. So there's a fine line here. But what I would say is, don't worry about the profit margin. Buying right, another common term in this industry, is more important to me than selling right, if that existed. Like, I don't need to sell for top dollar, but I do need to buy at the right price, because there has to be off rates. Like, I need to know what I can dump this for. So I'm not tying up all my money. So my advice would be, don't worry about the profit margin. Worry about what the price you're buying it at, because it gives you more options. You can either sell it on a chrono, an eBay, to someone you know personally, or to another dealer, if you're buying at the right price. You don't necessarily have to sell everything at that 20% margin, because I would rather sell 3 things for 10% in the same period of time. I might have to wait to sell 1 thing at 20%. So that's my advice. Like, don't buy right, but don't buy too right. Like, don't wait. Do this, because it makes more sense to me to be able to buy a watch and not lose money on it, and make, even if I make $100, I still bought that watch, made that relationship, made a little bit of profit, have that money back, and now I can reinvest it. Sometimes that's 3 days, sometimes it's 3 weeks. Hopefully it's not 3 months. But that's my best advice, is just do it and sell. And if you're buying at the right price where you can't lose, then you're good. And then as time goes on, as you get better at this, you'll start buying at the right price where you're now going to start to get, massive rips, as they say, and
Yeah.
make those big profits because maybe you're selling with a wider clientele and stuff like that. So, getting off the sidelines, I think is my best advice, and not being afraid, not looking at a profit margin as much as, did I buy this at a price where I know I can sell it for more than I bought it for? Keep it simple.
Wow. I love that answer, man. I think it's so helpful because you're right. And I think it goes across like you said, it applies to your job. It applies to a whole lot of things. If it's keeping you from acting, then it's keeping you from making money, even if it's at a less percentage. So that's really great, man. I think that kind of puts a wrap on the blueprint. And as we move into understanding the system and the way you operate your business, we gotta talk about the one that got away. Okay. I have to know, what is that one deal that you've done that still stings to this day?
One that I did or didn't do.
Well, whichever is most painful.
I can tell you the one that still keeps me up at night, and this is such a random story, but I had a consignment deal on Lindy Wardland. I have a client in another country, I won't say which one, who he had these Lindy Wardlands, which most people have never heard of this brand. It doesn't sell well. It's a very niche thing because we're talking like 44 millimeter watch. Usually they're like skeleton or something that's a very kind of specific look on a strap. So it generally doesn't have bracelet. It's just like a very, like, you have to find a person who looks specifically for this brand and this style watch and is probably at least 6 feet tall to be able to have a 44 millimeter, something like that. So or weighs a certain amount. So these things take forever to sell. The first two I took from him, I actually sold in like a couple of weeks, and I was astounded. I was like, maybe this is not as hard as I thought it would be. And I made decent money because consignment deal. So I was upfront with him. I was like, this isn't going to sell well, but if I can do it, I'll do it, and this is what I'll take from it. So he sells me two more, and these for months I tried. And I got one guy who he's like, I've been eyeballing this watch. I want it. He lived about 3 hours from me. But it would have been like an $1,800 profit, which for me, that's a fantastic number that I, to this day, have not had on the watch. I just don't play in that kind of margin yet. So I was willing to, because I was actually headed to South Florida. He was like in the Miami area. I'm in the Orlando area. I was actually headed that way that weekend by chance. I was like, I won't be, and he, obviously nervous. It was, to put it in perspective, like an $11,000 watch. So we were going to meet at a jewelry store. He was going to have it authenticated, pay me. He's willing to do like $1,000 deposit. Cause I was like, I'm not going to drive there if you're going to ghost me on this, and the day before we were supposed to do it, he was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I tried on a 44 millimeter in the store and realized it's too big for me. So I'm not interested in the watch anymore. And that was the one that got away, where I was like, we had this worked out for like 2 weeks. I was gonna make $1,800, which, based on my story about month one and 2000 being excited about that, I was like, this is like a month's work in one trip. That was the one that really got away from like I can't believe like that slipped through my finger standpoint. So that was one I doubt.
Man, that's tough. That's tough, especially when it involved, all of that logistical work. That stings.
Yeah, it all was worked out. He lived like 5 minutes from my mother-in-law, just by total. So, like, that part was the easy part. It just didn't work out.
Man, well, now that we know the one that got away, I want to talk about the system that you kind of have in place right now. And when we're talking about operations, right? I think in every business, I think as operators, as people who run a business, we try to find ways to operate more optimally, to operate, with less overhead, to be able to scale more and take more profits. So for you, man, I want to know, walk me through your day as a watch dealer. What does running, moment for time look like? What does the operation look like on a day-to-day now?
Yeah, well, like I said, I still work full time, so it's not a full-time thing, but it is something I love and take seriously. So the hours are kind of whatever they are, right? Like, someone someone needs something at 8 p.m., they need something at 8 p.m. I can't tell you the amount of people I've met at a Starbucks after tucking in my children at night and things like that.
Wow.
So yeah, it's you make of it what you will, but I would say like a general format. I like to do it in bulk for this reason that I do have two young children. I work full time and everything like that. So I'm usually looking to load up on 4 or 5 watches at a time once I've sold them. I find still to this day it's gotten easier, but sourcing watches is the hardest part. Getting inventory is the hardest part. Selling them is not the hardest part. Maybe not. Maybe selling at a number you want to sell it at is the hard part, but selling is much easier to me than buying because you have to buy right. So
Right.
I might spend a few days to try and stock my inventory. Then there's those logistics. However, we'll say 4 days for these watches to arrive. I'm receiving them more often than not. I'm going to FedEx after I'm dropping my children off at daycare and either picking up a watch or dropping off a watch. So that's kind of
Yeah.
part of my morning before I start work. And then when the watches come in, those are the photograph sessions. You're photographing them, getting them online, and once they're kind of online, then it's a matter of, okay, we're monitoring the metrics. At least I am seeing, is this doing well on eBay and Instagram and all the other places that I might have it posted to. And then I'm advertising them in Facebook groups and whatnot. So you kind of handle it then, and then sell a watch, buy a watch, whatever. I do have also an entire broker aspect of this, which I've developed, which has become a large part of my business and probably my favorite part of the business.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect too, which is I'm going to get a bat signal. Someone needs a specific watch. I'm going to then work my network, try and find that watch for that person, work in my margin and sell it. So
Nice. Yeah.
yeah, that's and you just do that over and over again, and that's kind of how it works.
Makes a lot of sense. I think it's cool that you're building this, and like you said, you're revenuing $500,000 while still working a day job. I think that's one of the things that people look to the buy and sell in whatever industry market for, which is that kind of, man, can I build this thing on the side? And then they rapidly find out, oh, I can actually turn this into my full-time job. Is that where you're headed? Is that kind of your goal, or are you totally cool with building this thing on the side and keeping what you're doing today?
It's kind of both. I mean, I think there's a number where, yeah, if I'm profiting that. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you're doing it, a few hours a week compared to full time, you have to take into account if you're making, say, I don't know, 50,000 a year working part time. If you're working this full time, you're probably going to scale up pretty quick in terms of profit because you have that much more time to do things.
100%.
So there's a number in my head where if I get to that number, I know, okay, with scaling up, I can exceed what I'm making in my day job. And then, yeah, like in a vacuum, I would love to do this full time instead of my day job.
Yeah,
I wouldn't just do it, right? It would have to get to the
of
point of
course.
it's replacing my job. So that number exists. I think it's obtainable. But if it never happened, like I would be fine in this situation too.
Wow.
I just genuinely love being in the community of it. I love the concept. Like I don't mind sales. My dad was in sales my entire life. So this part's, yeah, and I'm working technically without a salary and just on commission, but I'm not relying on it. So that's kind of what,
Right.
so
That's
it's not,
awesome.
yeah, it's nice. If you ask my wife, she might have a different answer sometimes. But yeah,
We had a date planned and you need to go to Starbucks at 9 p.m. What's
yeah,
going on?
right. Some of those like, hey, there's a guy in a hotel lobby I'm meeting at 9.
Yeah, yeah.
That doesn't go over well all the time, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, I try and make it so it's not a super inconvenience. But I've also sort of like the understanding is like there's going to be times when I kind of just have to jump in that moment, whether I'm negotiating a deal or whatever the case may be. Like sometimes it just has to be done.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I can go either way on it, but definitely there's a number. If I ever got to it, I'd be like, this is now something I want to do full time. I also look at the really long picture. When I retire, like this would be a great thing to have in retirement. I can still
That's what I'm saying.
make
It's such a
money
cool
on
like
something.
lifestyle business.
Yeah, there's
Like,
not a ton of
yeah,
overhead. You don't have to leave your house except to drop them off and pick them up.
yeah.
and it's for me like buying and selling something that I love. So like,
Yeah. I love that, man. That's so cool. I think, that kind of feeds us in, because I do want to respect your time. And I know we're getting to that point. For us at WristBook, it's interesting you say that you're not a full-time dealer and you're still dealing and doing well at it. Obviously, when we created WristBook, right, the all-in-one software for watch dealers to be able to operate their business, the back end, now starting to become the front office for dealers as well. I did picture the full-time dealer who was like, I'm going to do this and I need something to organize. So the fact that you're not full-time is really cool for me, as obviously somebody who had this person in mind and then captured this type of person. And I guess this is where I'll ask, for you, knowing that, where does WristBook kind of fit into your life? Because obviously, like I said, it makes a lot of sense for a full-time dealer who's doing this all the time to
yeah.
adopt a software and run all of that. But for you, how has it impacted you in the way that, it might impact the other dealer who isn't full-time yet?
Well, think of those two perspectives, right? You have the full-time dealer who has, well, I don't want to say all the time in the world, but this is what they're doing full-time.
Right.
The reason they want to use a wrist book is because they have probably so much inventory, like it's hard to keep track of all of the logistics. This is a one-stop shop. The reason someone like me wants to use a wrist book is because I do work full-time. I do have two little kids. I do have a wife at home. I do own a house. The amount of time that I have, when you factor all of that in, plus the fact I need like the actual hours to run my business, right? To find the watches, to sell the watches, to photograph the watches, to drop them off, to pick them up, all that. I don't have extra time, like in my life in general. So for me, a wrist book is, if I'm photographing these watches and I can go drop those pictures off on the wrist book and it's going to post it onto my website, which by the way, great for reputation is to have an actual website that you can point to and be like, here, I'm a real person, not just an eBay store. Like I have both of these things, and follow me on Instagram while you're at it, to be able to have that one-stop shop where I can input all of these watches that I just photographed and I'm posting, and I can go through eBay. That's why it matters for me. Can I, with the amount of inventory I have, where I'm only flipping, I don't know, 5 to 10 watches a month, can I do that on an Excel sheet? Yeah, I can. But it's the integration of those things that I can do this all in one process at night. Maybe I lose 2 nights a week, rather than watching TV, I am photographing watches all night and posting them to the different websites and putting them on WristBook so I can follow. But what I can't do is, when I did taxes last year, I had to go through every single month and total up the amount of money that I spent and the amount of money that I made and the overhead and factor that in. And then all of that's done with WristBook, right? Because now it's keeping track of my revenue and the ROI, which are things I'd manually do before, and also my profit margins, by month, by year, whatever it is. So that's where it comes in for me, is I don't have extra seconds, let alone hours, to dedicate towards this. So give me something that I can kind of work with on the run, and I can do it on my phone, which, it's also something I'm not doing with Excel.
Let's go, dude. Man, well, I appreciate the kind words. I'm glad WristBook is working for you. I'm glad that you are growing in the space. I think you're a really cool guy. And if we had 3 hours to talk, I feel like we could keep talking, because you're just great at this.
Yeah, we can.
Dude, well, maybe we'll have you back on later and we'll talk about some other more niche topics, because I do think it's, if I had the time, if you had the time and we had the time, I would definitely ask you way more about the micro brands, because that is a very enthusiast thing of you. And as somebody like me who, I'm starting to fall in love with these micro brands, I found this Italian, which actually they're not a micro brand, but nobody talks about them. It's called, I forgot their name, and I'm probably not going to pronounce it right, but it's this Italian sourced, I think it's Valenciaco or something like that.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm saying it right. I know. Yeah, I've had that.
Bro, there's this watch they have that's like, it has like waves on the dial that's like, they don't sell anymore. It was like limited time. That's my Grail watch. That's what I want to buy here.
Yeah,
The golden one.
They have a very fascinating history.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, I've had one, and that was also, I'm with you. That was a watch, and I'm Italian, so for me, I'm like, one of my phases of watch buying was like,
Nice.
I want a Panerai, I want a Lockman, I want Bianco, if I'm saying it right. I was like, I want iron watches, like to, whatever. And so I had one of those. The finish on them better than I thought they would be for the price point. I think they're a
Yeah.
good watch. But yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, they have very cool dials.
Yeah, but man, we're gonna have to save that for another one. But Vincent, man, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being a user in WristBook and choosing us to help solve these problems. It sounds like they are. And so if you had one last thing, if you had 30 seconds to inspire and encourage an up and coming watch dealer, or even maybe somebody at your level as well, who, just wants to connect with another dealer. If you had 30 seconds to encourage them and inspire them to keep doing what they're doing and never stop moving, I want you to talk directly to them and let them know what you think would help them the most.
Don't quit. That's probably the biggest thing. I think that too many people think this is going to be easy, right? Because they're seeing the successful people are the ones who are talking to you when you're first starting out. And you see yourself and you see, okay, I can be that one day. And then you start going a few months, you realize maybe it's going to take longer than you thought, or maybe it's harder than you thought. Just don't quit, because eventually you will develop your own system, your own niche, your own demographics, and you're going to fall somewhere on that line. And don't hesitate to reach out to people who are successful and ask them questions directly, because a lot of us like taking people under our wing and mentoring them. So I'd say acclimate yourself into the community and don't quit, and just put in the work.
Love it. Thank you, Vincent. I appreciate you. I appreciate the value you gave the people today. And if you're watching this and you watched all the way to the end, please consider subscribing, or we're going to be having a watch dealer every week until this breaks and YouTube doesn't exist anymore. But thank you, Vincent. Have a great week, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Sounds good. It was a pleasure. Have a good one.